either in person or remotely. Please be advised that the meeting will be live streamed and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance to the Council's data retention policy. The recording of the meeting may be added to the Council's website. The following staff are in attendance: Larissa Reid, Chief Executive, Lisa Fillery, Director of Resources, Robin Harris, Deputy Monitoring Officer, Joe Millard and Philippa Davies, Democratic Service Officers.
Sorry, Chair. Also in attendance is Deputy Chief Executive Emma Wiggins.
Thank you. Members, please I remind you to, when you are called to speak, if you can speak loudly and clearly, in order that the OWL system that you are familiar with from its use at area committees can pick up your voice for the broadcast. Alternatively, if you have a quiet voice, you may come forward to the front and either stand or sit near the top table when you wish to speak, so that the OWL can pick up the sound clearly. Thank you. So, agenda item 1, emergency evacuation procedure. There is no scheduled test of the fire alarm, and if the fire alarm does sound, please leave the building quickly using the doors signposted as fire escapes, which are to my left here. And I believe there are fire escapes behind you as well. Assemble in the car park and await instructions. If there is anyone in attendance that might require assistance evacuating the building, please make themselves known. Thank you. Right, agenda item 2, apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have received apologies for absence from Councillors Lloyd Bowen, Derek Parnell, Denise Knights, Peter MacDonald, Glyn Whelan, and Councillor Nicholas Hampshire sends his apologies. He will be late to the meeting. Thank you.
Right, agenda item 3. Do members approve the minutes of the council meeting held on the 27th of July 2022, minutes 219 to 229 as a correct record? Thank you, members. I shall sign those as such. Item 4. Are there any declarations of interest? Thank you. Mayor's announcements. Unfortunately, I had my announcement, my attendances at engagements, and I've left it indoors on the table. Notably, a couple that stood out for me was especially the Faversham Hop Festival. I was really thrilled to see so many people actually come back into Faversham for the Hop Festival. I mean, even before the official opening, Preston Street and all the other streets around were absolutely packed with people enjoying themselves, enjoying the music, enjoying good beer. And then after the official opening and towards the afternoon, it was just getting busier and busier and busier. So that was the highlight of the most recent engagements that I did. One that I was disappointed that I couldn't get to was the Pride of the Island Awards last week. Unfortunately, I had COVID, so in my stead, I'd like to thank the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Sarah Stephen, for standing in at short notice and doing such a sterling job representing us at the events that I couldn't make. Sadly, members will know that former councillor and Mayor of Swale, Honorary Alderman George Bobbin, passed away recently, and his funeral will be held at 1 p.m. on Thursday, the 20th of October, at the Garden of England Crematorium at Bobbin. I would like to invite Councillor David Simmons to pay tribute, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. members of the public. I hope the owl can hear me. Those of us who knew George Bobbin will remember him as a quietly spoken, amiable councillor who worked hard for his residents and was always good company during meetings and outside of meetings. Before becoming a councillor, George was well known in Bolton and Faversham, where he joined his father in their family butcher's business in Bolton Street. In May 1983, George joined Bolton Parish Council and has served continuously for just a few months short of 40 years. In Bolton, George campaigned tirelessly for the return of the village policeman, who he thought would be able to tackle local concerns before they became major issues and then crimes. George first stood as a Swale Borough councillor for Bolton and Courtney ward in 1995. He was unsuccessful on that occasion and stood again in 1999, losing by just 3 votes. However, it was third time lucky when he was elected for Bolton and Courtney in 2002. Whilst continuing to represent his interests, the interests of his residents, George was active on several committees and council, particularly planning, hackney carriages and licensing. After 12 years on Swale Borough Council, George was elected to serve as mayor for the 2014 civic year. After a nervous start, he soon became a highly respected and competent civic leader, visiting the very many local charities and organisations in all parts of Swale. George will be sadly missed by many of us, and we extend our sincere condolences to his 2 sons and the rest of his family. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. I'd now like to invite Councillor Mike Henderson to say some words, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I knew George for many years. Initially, nothing to do with the council. I lived in Bolton from 1976 for 5 years or so. So I was a customer at his butcher's shop, and not unusually saw him in the White Horse as well. I then met him when I rejoined the council in 2008 and worked with him for a number of years. George was always polite, thoughtful, friendly to other councillors and officers, and those are characteristics which are unfortunately far from commonplace. So it was always good to work with George, and may I simply say I very much regret his passing and send condolences to all his family. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And I now call on Councillor Roger Truelove, please.
Well, as ever, other people have said it already. but George, on behalf of the Labour group, we are very sorry to hear of his passing. And as others have said, he was naturally collegiate as a councillor. So he was friendly, affable, kindly, and don't think he ever indulged in any political comments whatsoever. And it's always those of us who do who compliment those who don't. Understand me? As we said, he did stand in Bolton and Courtney. He was a very good councillor for Bolton and Courtney. He was particularly assiduous at representing the ward on the planning committee and was clearly in touch with his local ward when he was speaking on planning matters. As others have said, he was a mayor. I wasn't conscious of a nervous start, but nevertheless, if you say so, you'll know better than I would. I thought he was a very successful mayor. And just to finish off, those of us who come from South London, like myself and Councillor Tatton, we do actually get to recognise the local accent. There is a local accent in this part of Kent. And George epitomised that, I think, and I opened that up to conversation. I said, you always live locally? No, I come from Croydon, he said. So, here it is, you know, and as Mike said, commiserations to his family. These are people who do serve the community without any apparent arrogance or self-serving. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Truelove. I'd now like to invite members to stand for a minute's silence in memory of former councillor, mayor. Thank you, members. And just briefly, before I move on from Mayor's announcements, I hope you've all received a copy from the Mayor's office inviting you to attend either individually or as groups on tables of 8 to the Mayor's Charity Quiz Night on the 18th of November at this venue. Thank you. Well, I'll move along then. I will be bringing forward the urgent motion, item 7, condolences to the royal family, to be heard before the leader's statement. So agenda item 7 then, condolences to the royal family. A motion offering condolences to the royal family on the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth has been received. Councillor Mike Baldock, I invite you to propose the motion. You have 5 minutes.
When the sad news came through Queen had died, I felt numb. It felt like something that could never happen somehow had. It felt really unreal. Her Majesty has been a constant, not only through my life, but for so many of us. Even my mother, who rang me on hearing the news, used to collect news cuttings of the then Princess Elizabeth when she was young. Her Majesty united generations and peoples across the world. She was a model of dignity and decorum, and an inspiration to many of us. She showed how a public servant should behave. She will be missed by us all, and I'm privileged to move this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. Call on Councillor Horton. I believe you wish to reserve your right. Is that correct, Councillor?
Second the motion and reserve my right.
Thank you very much. I'd now open the motion to debate. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, thanks to our Labour Group leader for allowing me the privilege of speaking on this motion. As a group, we wholeheartedly support the motion. There's little that can be said that hasn't been said already, and I'll just leave it all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Any other members wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Horton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This motion is about condolences to the royal family. But would it be inappropriate to second it without just making 1 or 2 mention about the Majesty herself? I don't think it mattered what your nationality was, whether you had a protected characteristic or not, what your gender was, the colour of your skin, the nature of your faith, or whether you had faith at all. It didn't matter about the colour of your political affiliation, whether you were a Republican or a Democrat. When you looked and saw the people sidling in quiet, in silence, past the body in state, you could not help, I believe, but be touched and recognise the depth of feeling across the entire world for Queen Elizabeth II. I can't think of anyone in history who had a role or a place in her people's heart the way she did. But reflect, if you would, for a moment on the royal family. They went through the grief, and I've been there. I've had my father die, I've had my mother die, and I suspect many of you have as well. It is heartbreaking. But they did it in the full light of every single camera being watched by millions, if not arguably billions of people as they went through their suffering. I think the best we can do is offer our commiseration and our condolences to them for their suffering and their loss. I second this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. Councillor Baldock, would you like to sum up?
I'll just say that, as the last line of the motion says, we look forward with optimism to the coronation of our new sovereign. God save the King.
I'd now like to put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Any against? We'll just ask. Okay. So the motion is carried. Thank you, members. We'd now like to move on to the rescheduled agenda item 6, the leader's statement. I'll ask the leader to read his statement, and then I will ask the deputy leader of the leader of the opposition to respond. Following that, I will invite other members to respond to the leader's statement. Members invited to speak for will have 3 minutes. This item has an overall time limit of 30 minutes, and to ensure a broad fairness, I will try to invite responses from members of the administration and the opposition groups in roughly equal numbers. This may mean that I deviate from the order in which members have indicated they wish to speak. Now, please remind members that responses must be responses to the issues raised in the leader's statement. Councillor Baldock, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And my apologies to the leader of the opposition. I haven't sent him a copy of this, even though I intended to produce events of today. It was done very late on. Well, it's been truly a momentous period we've lived through since our last meeting way back in July. We have sadly lost our Queen, but gained a King. We also have a new Prime Minister. We have experienced the hottest summer any of us can recall, and we have seen levels of inflation not experienced for decades. We are now experiencing a cost of living crisis that will impact on us all, a massive energy crisis, and a chaotic new economic direction from the government, which is throwing everything into greater uncertainty than ever before. As Bob Dylan said, the times they are changing. What hasn't changed, however, is this government's practice of throwing out half-baked proposals requiring councils to respond within extremely tight schedules and without sufficient detail to know what they are responding to. 4 weeks ago, Kent County Council were contacted by the government and asked if they wanted to put forward an expression of interest for the investment zone project. KCC officers, reasonably you'd think, asked for some detail. And the dealer officials said, there isn't any at the moment, but would you like to express an interest in investment zones anyway? KCC asked, would it require legislation? They were told, maybe. In the time between then and now, the following has happened. Dwell were told on the Friday that Kent had to collate all the applications and submit them. We had a week to apply, but the form wasn't available. On the Monday, we were told that the form was now available on the website, and the timescale was extended for another week. Then on the Wednesday, the form was changed, and district councils no longer had access to it. We were also told that KCC had to collate the applications and submit them all on one form, but each council could put all their applications on one form to KCC. Then last Friday, the deadline of Monday, we were told that we had to complete an expression of interest for each zone, which would then be collated by KCC. The information required included the increased value added by our contribution, what new commercial space would be created, the new employment creation and additional jobs, what planning use class would be required, what new residential units could be delivered, the level of relative underdevelopment of proposed sites, the increase in land value uplift, and what unfulfilled potential growth it had. Quite a lot of work for our officers to put these bids together. We were then also told on the Friday that the form had changed yet again and the new form wasn't available yet. The assessment criteria has still not been made available. But the DLUC officials thought it likely the assessment criteria will be sites with the greatest impact on growth and housing supply. And they expect larger sites to be optimal for achieving scale of economic growth and housing development. Housing impact needs to be demonstrated through either acceleration or additionality. And there is a strong expectation that investment zones will bring forward additional development. This takes our officers a lot of time preparing these bids, getting all that information, find out what they were really after wasn't called additional development. So whilst we initially sought to engage with the process in all good faith, I think most of us here will understand that given the focus on providing additional housing over and above the totally unsustainable levels that the government is already trying to foist upon us, it was felt this was just yet another developer's charter, and we would pursue the idea no further. Indeed, those schemes across Kent that have survived the chopping and changing appear mainly to be those with existing support, but will now be made easier and cheaper for the developers to push through, subsidised of course by the taxpayer. Even pursuing the proposal as far as we did took a lot of officer time working on a scheme that was virtually bereft of detail but required ludicrously short timescales and which kept changing. Why have I gone on about this? Because this is truly a government of chaos, trying to infect the rest of governments with the equal chaos. Rampant inflation, economic mayhem, energy uncertainty, and a government that seems to be staggering from one day to the next. This is going to have an impact on all of us. We're already seeing the economic impact of this. We're seeing inflation rising. This is going to impact on what we as a council can do for the people that we care for, and it's because of a government that is driving this country out of control. But to end on a positive note, many of you may have seen Jupiter in the sky this weekend near the moon. In astrology, Jupiter is associated with the principles of healing, prosperity, good fortune and miracles. Maybe a miracle is indeed just around the corner, because right now we need one. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Horton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's going to be an interesting one to follow that. First of all, thank you for the apology. It probably wouldn't help me much if you had. I think we've covered King and Queen. I agree entirely with you, much of what you said. I, in fact, have had conversations in the last week with our Section 151 officer about the ridiculous scenario that we have where we are required to jump through hoops for small sums of money. And I'm aware that we are not the only council that struggle in this way. And some councils have just said, actually, it's more difficult to get the money than it is to actually the benefit that it has for your community. And this was brought home to me in a case, and this one's in school, so this is not just local government. But there are two schools in Swale that I am involved with. One is in Upchurch and one is in Faversham. Both of those schools had extensive works that are required on them to their fire alarm system, the safety system of the school and the fencing around the school. The school in Upchurch was able to make a contribution towards the grant application for £465,000. They made a modest contribution and they got £465,000. The school in Faversham can't afford to make a contribution. As a consequence, they didn't get any money whatsoever. How can it be that a school that cannot afford to pay a small contribution has its children not protected from the fire, not protected by CCTV and not protected by fencing? That to me is an utter nonsense, and it doesn't matter what colour shirt or dress you wear, that is wrong. So I am at total agreement with the leader there. The leader said he was going to finish on a positive note, and he did. And I think his entire speech was positive about his views on the government. Thank you.
Well, I now open up to other members of the council for any comments. I've got Councillor Bonney, then Councillor Truelove.
Statement. I think we can only all recoil at the utter chaos that's happened over the last 2 weeks. And I think it's come home quite clearly to those of us who sit looking at council's finances and to the rest of the members present in the room who over the next few coming months will have to decide about the council's budget. And I think we need a miracle, quite frankly. We are expected to conjure up a budget having no idea what this government is going to provide us. We have an absolutely catastrophic set of numbers heading our way because of inflation, because of energy costs, but also because of their utterly ridiculous statement on a so-called mini budget that nearly sent the country bust and every pension fund with it. Overnight, they have doubled the borrowing rates for every local authority around the country. So any major contracts, and we all know we have a waste contract coming up, and we have other contracts, I think we're in for one hell of a ride. So, Mr. Leader, what miracle, what rabbit out of the hat do we think they can pull next? Because they couldn't have tried any harder to do more damage, could they, to this economy?
Thank you, Councillor Bonney. Councillor Truelove.
And it hasn't ended. We're only in the first stages of disaster of economic policy. I just wanted to ask the leader, do you not subscribe to the view that if things are bad, the responsible thing to do is to make them as bad as possible. The other thing is you use the word chaos quite a lot, and I'm quite sensitive about the word chaos. Because I remember, don't mind, a few years ago knocking on doors just before the general election and being told what a chaos it would be if we formed a government coalition of Labour and other parties. It's when Miliband was the leader of the Labour Party. A coalition of chaos. So can you imagine anything more chaotic than what we put up with in recent years? Constant changes of Prime Minister because of their developing inadequacies, leading up to the situation we're now in, where it's inconceivable that you could provide the country with a worse Prime Minister.
Thank you, councillor Sherlock. Councillor Martin.
Well, where do we start? Let's be honest. We start by saying, yeah, it was an interesting summer, wasn't it? We started off with a liar and a charlatan, admittedly, in Downing Street. And we've ended up with somebody who doesn't seem to know what they're doing, quite frankly. We've gone from somebody who started their job on Monday as Her Majesty's Prime Minister and ended it on Friday as His Majesty's Prime Minister. We've had a mini budget that's left the economy in tatters. We're seeing this idea of let's build more housing when people can't afford mortgages anymore. That's great. Yeah, brilliant idea. When mortgages for people are going through the roof, there are places where people are given an offer on their mortgage on Monday, and on Wednesday, that offer is withdrawn because the interest rate's higher for them, because actually the bank's not so sure. Can we really afford to do that? What sort of development are we going to get with that? There's no assurance for people. I mean, the developers should be the ones taking the risk, not the taxpayer. But by the same token, are they really going to develop out quick enough to meet the affordable housing needs? If they're sitting there going, well, are people going to afford to buy the private sale of houses that subsidise those? I don't think we're going to get anywhere near where we need to. And as for these predictable half-baked, you've got to do it on Tuesday, change it on Wednesday, you've got to do it Monday. We've been saying this for the last 3 years. Every time you want funding, the goalposts move. They suddenly realise actually every council might want that funding, so let's make it a little more difficult to get hold of it. It has been an absolute nut period. You say about chaos, well, I don't think we can get better from this current government. And let's face it, we've had people saying worst Prime Minister ever for the last how many Prime Ministers? It's not a game of top trumps, is it? I welcome the leader of the opposition's comments in agreement there. That is right. We do need a miracle. The leader is right. We do need a miracle. I think the country needs a miracle at the moment. But hey ho, we'll see where we go next. We can't change the past, but we can do our darndest to make the future as good as we can.
Thank you, councillor Martin. Councillor Henderson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been pretty involved in recent weeks talking about our next year's budget. Being a masochist, I sat down and listened to Prime Minister's Question Time on the news today and heard the Prime Minister categorically state she would not raise taxes and categorically state she would not cut expenditure. So quite what the hell she is going to do, clearly none of us know. But I'm coming back then to our budget problems, because we no doubt have to resolve them regardless of who is Prime Minister or Chancellor or the appropriate Secretary of State or whatever. And I do think and would ask the Mayor, the leader, should we not be working with all of the other boroughs in Kent the vast majority who are in similar position to us, with the LGA and writing to appropriate ministers, including, if necessary, the Prime Minister, and say, how do you expect us to continue? Part of the discussion on budgets, somebody came up with a bright point, which I didn't really like the way it was looked at, but which said we can just about almost meet our statutory obligations, provided we don't do anything else. None of our non-statutory obligations. And please remember, enforcement is non-statutory, leisure is non-statutory, swimming pools, football pitches, dry sport facilities, none of them statutory. And it's absurd. We might as well not be here if all we can do is our statutory duty. Then we might as well hand that back to central government, because there is no future for local government. And I think local government has got to stand up and make very loud noises that there must be a future for local government, because the idea of it being run from the centre just appalls me. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Henderson. I've got councillor Valentine and then councillor Paul Stephen. If you could make your comments succinct, please, so that we've got time for the leader to sum up. So councillor Valentine.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The leader mentioned the hot summer that we had this year, and you could well have added the drought that we're also suffering. But of course, we've got off lightly compared to some other parts of the world. So in particular, I think of the floods that we've had today. You would expect that, it's come forward. You would expect that this might serve as a warning and that the government might want to redouble its efforts to address the climate and ecological emergency. But quite the reverse. Since then, we've had the issuing of bids for new licenses for oil and gas exploration in the North Sea and for fracking. And that's when we already know that 80% of oil and gas reserves that have already been discovered and developed must stay in the ground if we are to meet our climate targets. I should point out, this climate emergency is going to produce immigration that we have never seen the scale of before. Large parts of the world are already becoming uninhabitable for humans. On top of this, we're seeing investment zones and perhaps everywhere else having planning controls thrown away. There's an attack on nature, on the ecology, dismantling of the EU Habitats Directive, which is a major protection for our natural wildlife, abandonment of biodiversity net gain in planning, and abandonment of environmental land management for farmers, so that we will go back to paying just on ownership of land rather than for managing it in an environmentally sensitive way. We've seen a coalition of these left-wing organisations, the RSPB, CPRE, the National Trust, forming an alliance, imploring government to stop this attack on nature. And this false dichotomy between growth and nature is completely unnecessary and completely wrong. Growth lies in developing a green economy, the thousands of jobs and training that could be provided in insulating our homes. To anticipate a motion coming up, thousands of jobs in public transport. It's insulate Britain seem to have the best ideas around here. The extremists are in government. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Stephen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thought the leader's speech, it was 100% right. And I would ask him, would he be sending this to the government exactly how you said it? Because it is an exact, complete correctness of what's happening at this present time. And this is not the first time. Oh, this sounds as if it's the worst time. And so I would ask him, can you send that to the government and maybe the rest of the Kent Council, borough councils, letting them know how we all feel? And on a lighter note, there is a brighter side of this. Everybody in this room agreed with it. That's wonderful. It goes to show that we are all working for everyone in Svalbard. Thank you very much.
Councillor Whiting,
Yeah,
please.
thank you, Chairman. Appreciate you giving me the opportunity. Just a couple of words, picking up really what we've just heard and what has been said earlier. I think, shortness of funds from government changing its mind, government changing the rules, government changing the forms to fill in. None of that's new. It may be worse now than it has been in the past, but we've had to deal with that for decades. And this council has a very good record of dealing with that, and I hope that will continue. I'm sure it will. What I would like to suggest is that the LGA, and Councillor Henderson remarked about the LGA, together with the District Councils Network, the County Councils Network, the South East Councils, a whole load of bodies, and have a very good record of persuading government which route government should go down when they think that government has got it wrong. So I would really urge the lead, and I'm sure he will, and the chief executives through the officers' networks that run alongside those of the elected members to bring all of these concerns to government, because I think together with the LGA and those other organisations I've mentioned, we've got a very strong hand to play. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Whiting. I see no more Councillor Kirby.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Wholeheartedly agree with the previous comments that have been said this evening. I just wanted to speak on behalf of the residents really that I've been representing recently. And when I was first elected, my casework was mainly about yellow lines or bins or dog poo or trees that are overhanging people's gardens. In the last 6 months to a year, that has moved from young families losing their houses and older people having to go back into work in their 70s because they can't afford their rents, and food banks and warm banks being set up for the winter in 2022 in a developed country. We can't heat our houses, like our old people can't heat their houses, and they're having to go into warm banks which are provided by the volunteer sector. I've had people call me that are trapped in abusive relationships because they can't leave because they have nowhere else to go. And I think as much as we talk about the importance of balancing the budget within our statutory obligations, we also need to talk about how we represent the residents that are being incredibly let down by some appalling financial situations. So I hope that everybody in this room will be as loud as they can be about what is happening to the people that we represent at the moment.
Thank you. I'm afraid that's the last time for the last speaker on the leader's statement, so I'd now like to invite Councillor Baldock to sum up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and some great contributions. I would like to thank the Leader of the Opposition for his gracious response at what is obviously an uncomfortable time. And it is clear that you get our concerns, and I'm reassured the message that he will be sending up his internal communications channels will indeed reflect the concerns we all share. Lots of questions, lots of comments, not so many exact questions. I'll ask what miracles. I'm still searching. What I do think we must send, the message we must send to this government urgently and with one voice, is that when the country is in a hole, the tool they do not need is a spade. I avoided reference to the environment because I felt it was already getting a bit depressing, and frankly it could be worse next time. So I'll say the apocalypse in November. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. Right. We now move on to agenda item number 8, the motion on water. If I can make a brief statement before this motion. There was some controversy over should motions be read out at full council? Shouldn't motions be read out at full council? And through the deputy monitoring officer and ourselves at the mayor's briefing yesterday, it was decided that under the constitution, motions should be read so that everyone can hear them. You should have all been able to read the motion in your papers anyway, but it was felt that the motions should be read. Councillor Gould's motion is rather a long one. Perhaps in looking forward, what was discussed yesterday was that the Constitution Working Group would take this on board and look at how motions should be set forward in the future, and maybe some training on writing and delivering motions to full council would be advisable. So in this case, Councillor Gould will read out his full motion, but there will not be any time such as the 5 minutes normally given to pad out the motion as such. We'll then take the seconder. However, Councillor Gould does have 3 minutes at the end of the 30-minute session to sum up on his statement and his motion. Councillor Henderson.
I guess this is a point of order, if I may, Mr. Mayor. It appears to me that the motion itself only starts on the bottom of the second page where it says this council therefore resolves to. Perhaps that's all we need reading out.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, Councillor Gould.
Apologies about a bit of a rookie error. I'm quite happy to go with your proposal to read out my motion. It is a long and complicated subject, so I wanted to make sure that it was adequately addressed in the motion. But I'm more than happy to go with your position on this one. I'll rule it out, read out the motion on full response.
Thank you, Councillor Gould. As I say, you do have 3 minutes at the end of the 30-minute session to sum up any points that you've picked up during the debate. So the motion concerning water issues in the borough has been received and set out on the agenda. All members have received tabled updates that was emailed and published on the website and left as a hard copy on your chair. Councillor Gould, I invite you to put your motion.
Thank you. Apologies, this motion was written about 2 months ago, and therefore some events may have moved on since. Following the major emergency declared on the Isle of Sheppey on the 13th of July 2022, resulting from the loss of water supply island-wide, and similar incidents in January 2016 and September 2017, this council resolves the Leader of the Council to make a formal complaint to the Water Services Regulation Authority, Ofwat, over the recent outage of water supply on Sheppey, covering both the handling of the emergency and the failure to act to improve the resilience of supply following the previous outages. The Leader of the Council is also after the right to the CEO of Southern Water to notify them of this decision. A copy of this complaint should also be issued to the MP for Sittingbourne and Sheppey and the Secretary of State for the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. This failure of supply has been followed by residents of Dunkirk being without supply and then a subsequent hosepipe ban. And while these are less severe in their impact, these have also revealed the inadequacy of the investment in supply. It is acknowledged that this year has been one of the driest on record,
both increasing demand and increasing leakage due to abnormal ground movements. However, records for weather extremes are being broken with alarming regularity as the climate changes. The National Audit Office report in 2020 on water supply and demand management concluded that parts of the South East are at risk of running out of water unless concerted action is taken. Despite this, Swale is being asked to make allocations for increased housing numbers in the local plan review, which can only increase demand. But there is a presumption that the statutory utility providers will be able to provide whatever infrastructure is required at whatever cost to water bill payers to meet the housing numbers. In view of this, the Leader of the Council is asked to write to the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Houses and Communities, asking him to review the legislation concerning the role of the statutory undertaking utility providers in the local plan making process, and to require them to give evidence at public examination of the local plan of their ability to meet their obligations with regard to supplying the proposed housing development, taking full account of climate change scenarios. Planning and Transport Policy Working Group is asked to consider commissioning an independent study into the sustainability of water supply to form part of the infrastructure delivery plan for the local plan review. Furthermore, this council notes that residents are deeply concerned about the regular, untreated wastewater discharges into our local rivers, estuaries and seas, and the cumulative impact this is having on wildlife and human health. This wastewater or sewage not only comprises of human waste, which contains E. coli bacteria and organic nitrogen, but also carries harmful levels of chemicals such as nitrates and phosphates, typical for domestic cleaning products. Rivers in England are in a terrible state. Chemical health is classified as bad for all of them, and only 14% of them have good ecological status. Beyond rivers, only 16% of waterways were classed as being in ecological good health in 2020. Farming and wastewater are the biggest offenders. Agricultural practices impact nearly 2/3 of rivers in England. Over half are impacted by the water sector, mainly by the sewage effluent. In 2021, data from the water companies themselves revealed that they have discharged untreated water containing raw sewage 375,000 times into English waterways. Releasing sewage into rivers and seas is no longer an emergency-only situation, occurring as a result of severe storms, but an everyday occurrence, even in normal rainfall. In July 2021, Southern Water was fined with 90 million for illegally dumping between 16 and 19 billion litres of raw sewage into waterways in coastal areas of Kent, West Sussex and Hampshire. They pleaded guilty to 51 counts of dumping poisonous, noxious substances, including raw sewage, after a criminal investigation. Untreated sewage has a negative impact on human health and biodiversity. The 2020 Kent State Environment Report identified just 11 out of 124 water bodies across the county met good ecological status. And here in Swale, raw sewage discharges are increasing from 172 spills and 358 hours of raw sewage discharges in 2019 to 286 spills and 1,190 hours of discharges in 2020. For the situation in 2021, the Southern Water reported 334 spills, totaling 1,698 hours of raw sewage across Sittingbourne, Sheffield, Faversham. The number of spills, well over a fourfold increase of discharge in just 3 years. This council therefore resolves to recognise Council's obligation to protect its rivers, estuaries and seas, including from the cumulative impacts of pollution, in line with local planning policy and the National Planning Policy Framework. Recognise that there is clear evidence of deterioration of water quality, cumulative impacts of these discharges, sewage overload. Ensure that evidence base is compiled that assesses the impact of sewage discharge, but this is factored into decisions made in new iterations of the local plan, including the overall level of future development, and is necessary independently from the evidence provided by the utility provider. Seek to better understand the cumulative impact of the wastewater discharge on the local rivers, estuaries, wildlife, and the health of our residents. Take a lead on addressing this issue, working constructively with other agencies, and ask the Policy and Resources Committee to invite the Chief Executives of Southern Water, plus senior representatives, Environment Agency, Ofwat, and Natural England to attend a meeting to answer questions on the current level of combined sewage outflows, CSO, and sewage plant discharge, and put pressure on Southern Water to stop all CSO discharges into chalk streams in and around Faversham, Whitchstick, and Thorncrete. Asking why nutrient neutrality rules aren't deemed to apply to water flow from Faversham Creek into the Swale, and encouraging Southern Water to upgrade the Faversham wastewater treatment works to include tertiary water treatments so that can be either recycled into the South East water supply or pumped back into the aquifer. To ask Southern Water from this day onwards its planning consultation responses for major development to clarify which treatment works will be managing the sewage, whether it has the information available to assess the impact on the number of durations of sewage discharges into local rivers, seas, and if it does have this information, to share it, noting that at present is going to be requested but not required. Request that planning officers from now on would include in all reports relating to major development a specific section on the impact of water courses, including the potential for development to affect sewage outflow to water courses, its cumulative impact, or to flag if this information is not fully available, so the information or lack of it clearly, transparently set out. The leader of the council is asked to write to the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, asking him to review the legislation concerning the role of the statutory undertaking of utility providers in the local plan making process, to require them to give evidence at public examination of the local plan of their ability to meet their obligations to safely dispose of sewage for proposed housing development. Finally, the leader of the council is further asked to request the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities to review the legislation concerning local plan reviews, so that in the event that the statutory undertakers and utility providers are unable to provide adequate evidence that both the supply of water and effective wastewater treatment are deliverable, this would be grounds for a deviation from the standard method of calculation of housing need. Thank you.
Right, Councillor McCall, please. You have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I very much like to see.
Thank you. Right, so I open up now the debate. Councillor Truelove.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This issue fills me with incandescent anger. The references to the Isle of Sheppey, Dordridge, and Dunkirk, and the discharges into the sea, they're all about one word, and that's investment, and a long-term failure to invest when it was clearly needed. And we all know that from the Isle of Sheppey. It's very irritating, because those of us who've been around some time remember the argument about privatising public utility. And the argument in favour was that private utilities right across the economy, not just this area, would be able to access capital and invest. What we said, on the other hand, was it would need the lack of public accountability. And so it has. The struggle we have to get a message across to these people and their sort of bland PR executives who brush away the obvious that they are severely letting down people and also the economy. It was absolute rubbish that we would get more investment. The money that they earn as profits go into shares and profit distribution. And so they consequently not sustain an important public strategic need. And as I say, it's not just water, it's across the whole piece. So this motion is brilliant, excellent, and shows a deep understanding of those who put forward this motion. But there is a subtext. We have got to get out of this madness that thinks everything is better if it's put in the private sector. You can see from your own experience that that is rubbish. And it's time, as a country, we realise the importance of public ownership of those things that everybody needs, every business needs, which cannot be put into the hands of private companies running out of the Channel Islands. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Truelove. Councillor Bear, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is more an urgent clarification, really. Taking on board what Councillor Henderson said at the beginning about the motion starting on page 8 at the bottom where it says this council therefore resolves. The top two items where the council resolves, paragraphs 2 and 3, aren't included under that. Can I have clarification that just because we've taken two motions and stuck them together, that is actually going to be part of what we're deciding this evening? Because it's not under this is what the council resolves.
This council resolves.
If I can bring your attention, Councillor Bear, to page 7, the top paragraph. Yeah, it does say at the end of the paragraph, January 2016 and September 2017, this council resolves.
It does, Mr. Mayor, but the way it's laid out in the agreement that was made earlier is we're discussing two separate motions.
No, Councillor Henderson made a point of order, but the whole of the motion was read out, so it is one motion. Thank you. Councillor Winkless, please.
I'm totally behind this motion.
No, just stand there and speak up.
I'm totally behind this motion. It's a total disgrace. The amount of water leaks that we've had throughout the borough. We had one in Milton for 3 or 4 weeks. Gallons of water flowing down the drains. Residents were contacting Southern Water, including myself, and nothing was done until I got the local press involved. And within 2 days, the road was closed and it was repaired. So I had that for the point Prophet Truelove made, and I did put it in my press statement, profits before delivery on infrastructure. So I'm totally behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Winkless. Councillor Horton, please.
Mr. Mayor, at the mayor's pre-meet yesterday, there was a level of surprise that there wasn't an amendment or a series of amendments to this motion. And I think that's because we recognise the professionalism, the understanding and the contribution that the member has made in putting together the motion. I do think there are a couple of problems with it, and this is a systemic issue, not specifically about this one. It commits us to an amount of work that might not have been looked at and costed, and against the background of us already saying we could probably barely afford to do our statutory responsibilities. I think there is a danger in motions that say we will do this and we will do that and we won't do this or whatever. But that's just a general point I made. In principle, we are totally in agreement that the treatment of the residents of our borough by the water company is utterly unacceptable. I recall, in fact, almost exactly a year ago, standing in another venue that wasn't the council chamber, talking about how inappropriate it was that our children were bathing in sewage off the island. So this is a perennial problem. It's something that we collectively need to work together to deal with, and we are with you as an administration to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Valentine, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At our last meeting, we had a previous motion on water supply in Sheppey, which was unfortunately withdrawn. But I think it raised important issues about the water infrastructure that this motion seeks to address and go beyond. The original motion called for the council to look for a way to bring in a moratorium on housing development on Sheppey until a secure water supply was in place. However, the current planning system does not allow for this, and this motion before us this evening was introduced to try and address some of these failings, namely the fact that a statutory authority, water companies, are under an obligation to meet the needs of whatever quantity of housing is developed. Despite the essential nature of the service, any deficits in their performance or plans cannot be used as a reason to delay development. This is set out in the position statement from Southern Water, which is tabled in the papers this evening. This refers to water treatment, but my understanding is that this applies to water supply as well. Essentially, this statement could be summarised as Southern Water have a duty to meet the line and keep to environmental standards, although of course we know they've failed spectacularly to do this in the past. And if it is hugely expensive to bring a wastewater treatment works up to standard, they will just increase the bills of everybody to pay for it. This means a need created by a development which requires large investment will be subsidised by everybody in the area rather than by the developers. Section 106 payments cannot be used for this purpose, and development levels cannot take account of water infrastructure efficiencies. This needs to change. Therefore, the motion covers wastewater treatment as if we are permitted to scrutinise the water companies. There are several vital areas that need to be addressed, particularly around sewage discharges and other pollutions. The motion details some of the increasing problems in the area, but I'm far from convinced that Southern Water's analysis can be taken at face value. This is even more important given last week's news that Southern Water will be paying back £28 million to customers because of their failures concerning discharges and flooding. A further important piece of context for this motion is provided by the recent reply by Southern Water to the Eastern Area Committee. There are two important omissions in this response. Firstly, that there is a moderate level of risk, according to their analysis, and secondly, that the existing level of development means that network capacity may be an issue. These are precisely the issues that the motion seeks to address and bring into the local plan-making process. We need independent analysis of these risks, meaningful dialogue with the water companies, and if network capacity is shown to be an issue, then this must be taken into account before new development is permitted. As the current system does not allow this, it needs to change. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Golly, what's the pressing evening in it? There we are. I'd say that I fully support this, this motion. I think it was it, Private Fraser who said, we're all doomed, we're all doomed. I would just like to, say something about farming. It says that the motion says that farming and wastewater are the biggest offenders. But in support of farming, I would say that we heard on the radio yesterday morning that this summer has created, the hot sun has created the sweetest apples for generations. So we've got a bumper crop of apples. The major problem for farming is from nitrate leakage into waterways. Probably a 300% increase in the price of nitrogen fertilizers could well have an effect where farmers won't use so much. So whether we'll be able to produce the crops to feed the nation in future, I don't know. There are also problems with the supply of water in agriculture. We use trickle irrigation for our strawberries and raspberries, but even that is difficult. It's mains water, which is mighty expensive. So there are lots of problems, Mr. Mayor. But at least in agriculture, innovation is coming forward, and we're able to hopefully continue to do a good job for the nation. So it's not all doom and gloom. Let's at least have a smile occasionally. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. I can take two more speakers if you are very, very quick. Councillor Bonney, please.
My voice is loud enough, I'm sure. Anyway, thank you very much. I fully support this extremely well-written, thoroughly researched proposal before us tonight, this motion. It's comprehensive and enlightening, but utterly frightening and appalling. And to the spelling out to us the number of spills and hours of discharge of wastewater into the surrounding waters and streams, it's just frankly outrageous. We are supposed to be a first world country. This is something you would expect to see in a third world country. Just this last week, we've had 4 burst water mains in Robinson. One so bad it's now undermined the road that goes around the village green. And Southern Water did everything in their power to deny they even had a water main across the village green. Not for our parish clerk pleading with them for 20 years to repair the reservoir at top of Robinson on Stockers Hill. And she couldn't get out the end of her drive this week to put her wheelie bins out because of the burst water main. She could only do it with her wellies. So I think that just highlights the individual issues, but also the legacy of a hot summer. And without further investment, we are going to see over the next few months more and more breakages as the ground rehydrates, the ground moves, etc., the supply, but also the spills. So I absolutely support this. I support every aspect, including that they come to our local plan inquiry and set out exactly what they can achieve, because I think we've seen it all with large housing developments where substandard subsystems and wastewater treatment plants are not enacted and put in ahead of development.
Thank you, Councillor Bonney. Unfortunately, we are running very, very tight to time, and I do have to call in the seconder and the proposer for their summing up. So unfortunately, I can't take any more speakers from the floor. So Councillor McCall, please, if you can be as succinct as possible.
Yeah, I've not got much to add. I just wanted to say that me and Councillor Gould worked hard with the motion together, and it's
get everything the same motion.
Thank you, councillor McCall. Councillor Gould, please. Just have your 3 minutes.
I will keep it short, I promise. I'd just like to acknowledge this motion more adapted from that was brought in the summer. And I think I wanted to take that opportunity when we amended the summer to just expand it, because I think it is such an important issue that we need to address. I think I was focusing in the motion mostly on the impact on the planning system, but I think the thing I would like to just draw a bit more attention to is the need for enforcement and regulation.
Yeah.
And I think these are 2 areas that are, as well as investment, greatly under attack in this mindless dash for growth at all costs. We need to remember what is growing. We don't want growth of algal blooms and E. coli in our waterways as part of the dash for growth. We scrap regulation. So that is all part of the overall picture. But thank you for your comment, and I commend the motion to the council.
Thank you, councillor Gould. I'd now like to so I'd then like to ask members in attendance to state their vote by show of hands. All those in favour, please raise hands. Thank you, members. That is carried unanimously. Sure.
I think the member wishes to say they weren't.
So was there? So are you voting against or abstaining, councillor Imogen? Abstain. Right, as we've made such good time, I think we can carry on now for just a short while. I was going to call an adjournment, but saying as we've made such good time, I think we'll move straight on to agenda item number 9. Motion cuts to KCC bus subsidies. A motion concerning KCC bus subsidy cuts has been received as set out in the agenda. Councillor Baldock, I invite you to propose the motion. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. The motion is KCC buses. This council believes that the decision by Kent County Council to cut bus subsidies is a seriously retrograde step that will have a hugely negative impact on many people in our communities for the following reasons. It goes against policies supported by both KCC and this council to improve the use and accessibility of public transport. It unfairly impacts upon the elderly, disabled and young people, those who are unable to afford their own private transport. It will increase rural isolation and the impact of loneliness on vulnerable people. It undermines the local plan review, which to meet the government housing target will need to see a significant shift in journeys being made by private motor car towards greater use of public transport and active travel. It is contrary to Kent County Council and Swale Borough Council policies to achieve net zero carbon emissions. For these reasons, we call on the Cabinet members for Highway and Transport KCC to cancel the withdrawal of bus subsidies with urgent effect. Furthermore, we call on the Cabinet member for Highways and Transport KCC to instigate a review of how bus services can be made more relevant to people's daily travel requirements, more accessible and more affordable to increase the use of bus services in line with the policies cited above. I'm happy to propose. Would you go straight on the speaker?
No, you can.
Point of order, please, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hawken.
Can I just take a clarification The first line says this council believes that the decision by KCC. I do not think KCC has made a decision. Correct. I think we could deal with this quite quickly if we put the word anticipated decision in there to help. But as it stands at the moment, I believe this motion is incorrect.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Baldock.
I think they had made a decision, because if they hadn't made a decision, scrutiny wouldn't have been able to review that decision. Okay. What was scrutiny reviewing? It wasn't a decision.
Well, I can just clarify, Chalkwell and Swale, that no decision has been made of withdrawal of bus subsidies from Chalkwell. It is still being reviewed at this point in time. Some other bus subsidies in the rest of the towns have already been decided, but nothing in Swale.
What proposal from councillor Horton?
What was your proposal then, councillor?
The proposal, Mr Mayor, was that we insert the word anticipated in front of the word decision.
Happy with that, councillor Baldock?
Mr Mayor,
Thank you. Yeah.
so, sorry, in the light of that, also the word cancellation or cancel. Cancel was withdrawn, but of course you can't cancel something which has not actually been decided.
You will cancel anticipated.
It's there.
Council will reconsider.
Right, so councillor Baldock, you're happy with the insertion of the word anticipated in paragraph 1 and reconsider in the second to last paragraph. Thank you. And is your seconder happy with those?
Sorry, what was the second? The word cancel in the second to last paragraph changed to reconsider. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Is this a point of order, councillor Ingleton?
Changing their name.
Yeah.
They got fine, they've agreed their name has changed.
Yeah, councillor Ingleton's got a point of order.
The motion has been moved, this is an amendment to it, so we should be voting.
Yeah, it wasn't seconded.
It hasn't been seconded yet, councillor Ingleton. So the amendments have been put in, the alterations to the wording have been inserted as requested. The proposer is happy to accept those in alterations. I now call on councillor Valentine to speak or reserve his
No,
right.
he hasn't spoken
He
yet.
hasn't spoken yet.
Oh, he's only been out the motion. He's got more time.
Right. Carry on, councillor Baldock.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Sadly, my speech opened, I think this motion speaks for itself. I think this motion now does speak for itself. KCC's decision to slash bus subsidies, which is being reconsidered at this month's, that was in here. Being reconsidered at this month's county council meeting, following a decision by the scrutiny committee, cuts needed to be looked at again, was a highly damaging and retrograde action. that runs counter to so many of ours and indeed KCC's own policies. People have been left unable to access vital services in our towns. This isn't just rural people, but those who live in the suburbs who are unable to drive and cannot afford taxis. People are worried about being left unable to meet friends and their social networks, so vital for support. People are really worried that they will be left unable to access medical appointments unless they spend whatever savings they have left on taxis. This is an insidious attack on our young and our vulnerable at a time when they can least afford it. So let's send a clear and united plea on behalf of our residents to KCC to rethink their anticipated decision and to continue their bus subsidies. Have to be.
Thank you, councillor Baldock. Councillor Valentine, do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
Second the motion.
Thank you. I now open up the debate to the floor. Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, can I start by saying I fully support this? I think it's quite ludicrous that we're doing all this work on active travel. And KCC are doing their very best to cancel its value. I think I'm right in saying that a public transport bus does not touch my ward in the north of Faversham any longer. They've all gone, and all of my residents are just left wanting for it. So I do support it. I did just want to add something though. My understanding is that the position is, if you like, even worse than Councillor Baldock explains. We have, I understand, an imminent strike by Arriva bus drivers, which will hopefully temporarily, but which will even make the matter worse. And we also have Stagecoach, the other major bus service provider. And again, I have to say, I understand, I have not been able to approve this yet, but saying that they could very definitely extend the services they provide in Swale if they could get a depot in Swale. So I'm really simply asking a question, not to amend the proposal, but to ask if the leader or officers are aware of that, and if not, whether they would arrange a discussion with Stagecoach. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Henderson. Councillor Beart, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Earlier, when we had the leader's statement, we heard about we're struggling to meet statutory requirements rather than spending on things that are voluntary. What this motion does is tells another authority what they should spend their voluntary funding on, because these aren't statutory services, these are subsidies. And I think what's important to remember is KCC aren't cutting bus services. They're cutting subsidies, and the bus companies are then cutting the services because they're not commercially viable. Now, out of the services, there's only one on the island that I can speak of, which is the Sunday service, the 360, which 9 times out of 10 is running empty buses, double-decker buses up and down the island. What's that doing for our carbon image? We're running empty buses for a few people that use them. Now, to put it into context, to save that service under this subsidy that's been proposed to be cut is just shy of £32,000 a year. It's not a lot of money. The bus services cannot make them commercially viable. And if you go on the KCC website and look at the current list of bus services and the changes that are proposed, there are more services proposed to be cut by the bus companies than there are subsidies. That's not because they've had subsidies withdrawn, it's because the bus companies can't make them work. People aren't using the buses, which is why they're being cut. I completely agree. We want to promote people to use them. And the government have just brought in a level on how much the cost of a bus service will be capped at. But what I'm trying to get at is we're telling another authority that they should be providing a service that isn't statutory when we've just sat here and said we're having to make our decisions ourselves. As I will be at the full council meeting when this will be debated in a week's time, I will be abstaining regardless.
Thank you, councillor Bear. Councillor Whiting, please.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. A couple of points if I may. I kind of agree with the motion only because previously I've never supported this salami slicing of subsidies in this way. I've always supported a fuller, a more comprehensive review of services to see how that may improve things. It's what, just looking back 100 years ago when I was in the job at KCC, that's what I did, and we managed to get new services developed in Dover, new services developed at that time in Sevenoaks as well. Less money than the subsidies cost, but we got better services as a result of that full review. So I fully support the idea that we should go down the full review. I've got a lot of sympathy though with Councillor Beer. 98% of the bus services in Kent are not subsidised in any way at all. We're only talking about 2% of the bus services in Kent, which is why I do believe there are other ways we can help as taxpayers. We can help to keep these services not to keep them necessarily running in the way that they are now, but to create better services as we've done previously. So I will be supporting the motion, but I was very pleased that it was two Conservative county councillors that proposed and seconded at the scrutiny committee at KCC that this thing should be sent back to the cabinet for them to reconsider what they were proposing to do. And I still have a bit of a problem with the wording of the thing because it's talking about withdrawals. I nobody's withdrawn anything here. So it still talks as though a decision's been made, which it hasn't. But in the spirit of some togetherness, let's go with the motion. I'm more than happy to support it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, councillor Whiting. Councillor Tatton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A statement was made that Stagecoach do a better job of better coverage in Swale and Sheppey. How have you come to that conclusion?
That isn't what I said. What I said was, I have been informed that Stagecoach would be prepared to look at widening the service if they had a depot in Sittingbourne. That is not a defined statement that I am representing Stagecoach. I am saying and said, I simply hear that announced and invited members and officers to explore it with Stagecoach. Not a proposal.
Thank you for clarification, councillor Henderson. Councillor Horton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Leader, for bringing forward this motion. I have a great deal of sympathy with the content of the motion, but I am conflicted over what we are trying to do. Councillor Beard has touched on the concern that I have. We have had a discussion tonight that we can't afford to deliver our services. If this were an amendment at a Swale council, it would be expected that somebody saying we don't want a slice of the cake reduced there would have to say where they wanted the slice of cake reduced. We are not offering that as something that we are proposing in this motion. I don't think it's right that we should be telling another authority how to do its business. I think it might be right that we might express our view on some of the decisions they are making. And we've got county councillors who do that on our behalf. So I am conflicted with what we are asking to do, but I am actually very supportive of the provision of appropriate public transport. And I think that is where we need to go with active travel. I do not think buses which are something of the past, represent the way that we move our population in the future. And I think the onus is on us to get that right.
Thank you, councillor Horton. Councillor Bonney.
I wholeheartedly support this motion with its changes too. I must speak as a rural ward member. We have a subsidised 343 service, which goes from City Hall, Robinson and Huntsville to Bredgar. There is absolutely no bus service for Milstead. So to remove this subsidised route would leave those 3 villages with no bus service either. So that'd be the entirety of my ward apart from Backchild. Backchild also faces considerable cuts as well. When the expansion of KSP was discussed at planning, it was recognised that over the years, tampering with bus services had caused the commercial bus service to collapse. It disappeared. So we had an employment site that had no public transport infrastructure. As a quid pro quo, we asked for a bus service to be reinstated to that site. I had extensive discussions with KCC and the bus company, and I have to say the bus company were actually fairly forthcoming, were quite amenable and open to looking and exploring options. However, KCC decided in its wisdom that it would only extend a Sittingbourne service to the site. And instead, I've suggested that perhaps they might look at 343 and use some money, try to make that a commercial service by opening up another stop, thereby connecting the villages to an employment site and to the town, and vice versa. KCC, in its wisdom, said that would not stand up. So what we can say from this is KCC really aren't open to exploring options. And actually, they just want to cut services to the rural villages, because that is exactly what we have ended up with. You say about 2% of bus services are subsidised, but there are a lot of villages out there that have no bus service. I think we have ended up with an absolutely appalling service. If you go to somewhere really rural like Cornwall, they run their own bus service county-wide. I went to Holden, which is a really remote beach with nothing around it, and literally every 10 minutes went past a bus service. Yet you can go to Kent, areas of Kent, which is hugely more populated than Cornwall, and our bus service is non-existent. Something's radically wrong, apart from our economy going completely pear-shaped. It seems our bus services are not adapting to the needs of our population.
Thank you, councillor Bonney. Councillor Martin, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I welcome the motion. I think we have to bear in mind, why are some of these services no longer commercially viable? Let's track back to a few bus subsidy cuts ago. You used to get a service that was subsidised. The last bus of the night was always subsidised from Canterbury to Faversham. That meant that those who worked in Canterbury could actually get the bus into Canterbury and then get back to Faversham on the last bus. As soon as that subsidy went, all of a sudden, people like me that worked over there couldn't use busing. So actually, we weren't getting that morning bus because we were getting cars. So all of a sudden, the morning service isn't viable. Bus companies got to get rid of that one as well. So now you have one bus, one double-decker that fills with students going to school and students left on bus stops because they can't get on, because that other service has gone. Sometimes it's the cumulative impact that you have to consider. It's not just that you're going to save £10,000 here by cutting that one service that has 3 people on it. The fact that the bus driver needs to be the other end, the next service, going to have to cut that one as well now. It is a very tricky one, and I do have some sympathy when we say we're asking another authority to spend their voluntary money. It's not their statutory service. But actually, if they want to meet their own targets for carbon neutrality, they're going to have to rely on it. But we do have to have an investment in mass transit in this country. We do have to accept that we're going to have to start travelling together again. If we want to make a difference, if we don't want roads built on every patch of green space, if we don't want to end up queuing on the A2 full line from the top of Beckenham just to get the name. Let's have a bus service and make life a darn sight easier for an awful lot of people. Quite frankly, this is the least we can do, and it's a starting point. We're only asking them to take a look. I'm not saying do it. Have a look. This is our thoughts. If they don't like it, they won't go for it. But we've got to ask the question.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Dendor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Reading a couple of paragraphs from here, unfairly impacts the elderly, disabled, young people, etc. It will increase rural isolation and the impact of loneliness. A significant shift from journeys being made by private motor car towards greater use of public transport, and of course affecting net zero carbon emissions. Totally sympathetic for, but I can't go with this motion. And I'll tell you why. Councillor Pearce said it. I sat in the committee this morning, I sat in the committee yesterday. Where do you want money to take it from? Social care? SEN? Schools? Where do you want to pull that money? Because it isn't just sitting there on a tree that you can put into this. And you think you've got a deficit here at Swale. You have no idea what the deficit is. It's massive. Okay? So they are dealing with exactly the same problems with their budget that you are, but they're much, much larger. Nobody wants to cut these. Of course we don't. When you say there's some of these horrible people that are sitting there thinking, oh, we'll get rid of the buses, that's a nonsense. We're sitting there trying to make judgments between different services and trying to prioritise where that money goes. It's a horrible, horrible decision to make. It's a decision we have to make, just like your leader said earlier that you're going to have to make here. Exactly the same kind of decisions. Come back to Stagecoach. It was mentioned that Stagecoach may be looking for a depot here. I can confirm that. They have. But let's not mix that up with this. They're looking for a depot to run viable bus services, not to be subsidised. They're not asking for subsidies. And they might provide a better one than Arriva. They're not a competitor to Jordan. But those are viable bus services, not subsidised bus services. So yes, Stagecoach are absolutely worth talking to their damn good company. You talk about, somebody talked about Detling Hill. I travel up and down Detling Hill all the time. And every time I look at the X3 and X4 on Stagecoach, it's empty. But I would love to see them move the Stagecoach service further along the A2 and develop a viable part down that end. There are other ways. We talk about the review. The review is going through at the moment. Everybody is trying to think of different ways of doing it, from on-demand services like pen carriers, things like that. So yes, we're all trying to think of other ways to tackle this that make it viable and get cars off the road. Please, I'm not doing it for the sake of doing it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dendor. I've just got time, if you're succinct, to take one more speaker, and Councillor Gould, please.
I will be very succinct. I think the problem actually stems back really to the same problem that Councillor Goulard identified a long time ago, that this is a public good which needs to be a public service, and that the investment is not just at ACC level, but I think it's actually much higher up than that. There needs to be a thorough commitment that actually transport is something that is available at cost. And we can see that other countries are doing this as a way of addressing the cost of living crisis. they're actually looking, this, if we do this, we can get a win-win situation. People can travel, they can get cars off the road, and actually gives people a viable way of getting around. So I think we really need to push this back up the line. We're pushing with this motion to ask KCC to reconsider. In turn, they need to put pressure on the government as well to reconsider the whole approach to public transport, that it is a public good which actually oils the wheels of the economy and actually enables things to happen in a way that focusing on a car culture that just jams everything up. So I would commend this motion as the first step to pushing things up the line to actually have a total rethink of how we get around.
We have got just a bit of time left, so I will call Councillor Simmons, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've a lot of sympathy with this motion, and I will support it. I'm a little bit nervous about the wording, and also I'm not clear in my own mind as to which bus services are subsidised and which ones aren't. But I would say that there is a train line between Faversham and Canterbury, so there is an alternative there. But in my ward, the villages of Battlesmere and Leveland, Eastling, Newnham and Doddington are all served by bus services. And if they lose those bus services, they won't have any ways of getting into town, because really, to be honest, not quite sure what we mean by active travel half the time, but it's not, a lot of them are not feasible for cycling, and it's too far to walk from Stallersfield to Faversham. So I will support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. All right, I now go back and call Councillor Valentine, who's reserved his right.
Let me deal with some of the points that have already been made. Councillor Beard asked about carbon savings of cutting the bus service or the carbon cost of cutting them. So I'm looking here at the report from the Cabinet Member for Highways and Transport to the Environment and Transport Cabinet Committee on the 6th of July. And at paragraph 4.4, they address the carbon savings. So they say if all the people who use the buses take the car instead, it's estimated there will be an extra 21 tonnes of carbon emitted per annum. Those running the bus services emit 2.7 tonnes. So there's a very clear carbon cost to cutting the bus services, contrary to our policies, contrary to KCC's policies. The other point Councillor Beard raised was this issue around us telling KCC how to spend their money on non-standard services. I think Councillor Gould has made the point very well that the problem is that central government don't fund the bus services properly. And we shouldn't be like a bunch of rats fighting over the scraps. What we need is all of us to work together to put pressure on central government to fund bus services properly. And this government needs to stop its war on the poor and prioritise tax cuts for the rich, road building, over providing bus services, that will help the cost of living, help the travelling crisis, take us to a future. Where Councillor Horton thinks buses belong in the past, I just don't know where that notion has come from at all. Clearly, he's not looked at any sort of work on carbon reduction, the ways in which we might travel. Clearly not looked at our local plans policies. Buses will be very much an essential part of the way we travel. Councillor Whiting made the point that only 2% of bus services in Kent are subsidised. I find it really an extraordinary way to start planning transport by assuming every piece of transport that you put in must make a profit. I think it's entirely the wrong way of thinking. But I would point out to councillor Whiting, 100% of the bus services in Kent will be cut with this decision. His ward will lose all of its bus services, and it's one of the worst hit.
30 seconds, councillor.
Okay, okay. And on the equalities, I would refer you to the same report there. And analysing the consultation that was done, the officers set out the impact that it will have on vulnerable populations. So 41% of respondents indicated they do not have an alternative option for the services. The proportion unable to identify an alternative is notable and increases amongst the elderly and the disabled. 27% note they have no alternative from any of the services they use, and it goes on and on and on, quoting these impacts of the isolated children.
Thank you. Councillor Baldock, briefly, if you can, please.
It will be, with Councillor Valentine's just nicked off what I was going to say. So much better. I will also be at that meeting at Cape Town Council in a few weeks when this is discussed. And I have no problem representing my residents of both councils. I'll be speaking at that meeting as well. A lot of stuff was said about, oh, we're telling another council how to spend their money. We're telling another council, you know, this is not statutory. Let's just first remember, this is last year, this is the budget that they passed in February this year. So next year, this is already the budget that they've already voted on. What we're asking KCC to do is to reconsider withdrawing bus services that have an impact on our residents. And that is because of that impact. Of course, we're going to talk to other councils. It's what councils do. They tell them, if you do that, it has this impact on our residents. I think we might be wanting to talk to them about the impact of their decision to cut homeless support as well, because that has cost the Kent councils a huge amount, far more than Kent County Council has paid. And I find it a little odd, because I seem to remember a joint transport board a few years ago, one of the members urging us to write to the cabinet member about something, and it was him. Of course, we write to other cabinet members and we write to them and say, please don't do this, do that. We don't think this is a good idea. Reconsider this. And as Councillor Gould said, that's the first stage. What we need is Kent County Council to be saying to the government, don't do this, have them think about it again. What you're doing is damaging and hurting us. And I heard the leader of the opposition earlier saying, or indicating just that the Conservative Party will be sending up to their own internal channels their concerns about what's happening with our economy. So yes, we do have to talk to each other. We do have to let them know the impact it has on our residents. And that's what this motion is trying to do. I hope we can all support this.
I've had a request from Councillor Palmer for a recorded vote. Do I have any other supporters for that? So we have the prerequisite 5.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Right. So 4 against or abstain. Councillor Baldock. 4. Councillor Baird. Abstain. Councillor Bonney. Councillor Roger Clark. Myself, 4. Councillor Darby, Councillor Davey, Councillor Dendor,
Abstain.
Councillor Eakin, Councillor Fell, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Gould, Councillor Anne Hampshire, Councillor Nicholas Hampshire, Councillor Harrison, Councillor Henderson, Councillor Horton,
Leader makes a good point. 4.
Councillor Hunt, Councillor Ingleton, Councillor Jackson, Councillor Jays, Councillor Denise Knights, Councillor Marchington, Councillor Martin, Councillor McCall, Councillor Neal, Councillor Nsanga, Councillor Palmer, Councillor Perkin, Councillor Pugh, Councillor Rolls, Councillor Saunders, Councillor Simmons, Councillor Paul Stephen, Councillor Sarah Stephen, Councillor Tatton, Councillor Thomas, Councillor Truelove, Councillor Valentine, Councillor Whiting, Councillor Winkliff, Councillor Woodford. Right, members, the vote is as follows. 36 members voted in favour with 4 abstentions, so the motion is carried. Okay. So following on from this, I'd now like to take the opportunity to adjourn the meeting for a 10-minute comfort break. So if you could be back in your seats by 10 past, please.
change the gap.
You like some?
All right, thank you, members. We move on now to agenda item number 10, questions submitted by members of the public. There are no questions this meeting submitted by members of the public. So I'll move us on to agenda item 11, questions submitted by members. Our first question comes from Councillor Whiting. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. While the council provides lots of services on behalf of council taxpayers, the only tangible service the vast majority of our residents pay directly their council tax is the bin collection service. Since we last met, Mr. Mayor, there have been further issues with collections, with some not having bins collected for up to 4 weeks, and others forced to leave bins out on pavements for days waiting for collection. Is the chairman of the Environment Committee happy that this is under control and that the service can be guaranteed moving forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whiting. I now invite Councillor Saunders to give a response, please.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Whiting. I agree with you that the waste collection service is an important service and that its reliability is a key issue for residents. And as Chair of the Environment Committee, I'm committed to supporting officers as much as I can in ensuring the reliability of the service. Although there are occasional exceptions to consistent bin collection, it is worth emphasising that the overall volume of missed bins is extremely small. We set a very stringent target for missed bins. Council contractor makes approximately 90,000 bin collections a week in Swale. Across June, July, August and September, figures show that on average, just 57 bins were missed a week, fewer than 1 in 1,000 weekly. It's also worth emphasising that it costs just under £50 a year to provide the standard waste collection services that a household receives, which I hope you will agree is good value. Post-pandemic economic environment is challenging for delivering a wide range of public services, with particular problems in the waste sector related to staff recruitment, vehicle supply and increasing costs. Weather conditions can also impact. So, for example, vehicles were more prone to breakdown in the hot weather that we had during the summer. I'm pleased to say that we have had fewer problems in waste collection than many other local authorities. I'm also clear that our officers work hard to ensure that risks of collection are controlled and are very focused on minimising negative impacts on residents. They often have to take tough decisions on whether our contractors should try and return for missed bins or residents be asked to hold on to waste until the next collection. Wherever possible, we will opt for a collection a few days later rather than cancel the collection completely. But there are a few occasions where staff resources or vehicle availability don't allow this. During the current waste contract tendering process, officers are also looking at all options to try and increase resilience in the service. In conclusion, while I'm not complacent about the quality of our waste collection and environmental services, and do my best to support officers in maintaining service standards in a difficult environment, I believe there's plenty to be positive about based on our achievements in maintaining the service, the costs involved, and the positive feedback that we got from the public in the waste survey last year.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. Councillor Whiting, do you have a supplementary question?
Well, I do thank you, Chairman. I thank Mr. Mayor, I thank the Chairman for his response. I mean, for the residents of my ward, this is the one thing I get more correspondence about any other issue. I'm sure that's the same with other, but so like the 2%, 90% earlier, I got berated for. It's all very well saying a very small percentage suffer this, councillor, but at the end of the day, it's the same group in my ward that are suffering it, and I think far too much. Moving forward, in my supplementary, moving forward to help guarantee this, is the chairman of the committee looking at hydrogen vehicles as a replacement for the current diesel vehicles to both hit reliability targets, I don't think EV will, and also to meet those environment. Thank you.
Councillor Saunders.
Okay, thank you for that supplementary question. Obviously, the council's in the middle of the tendering process, and various providers are putting in proposals. So I don't think I want to get into the detail of what proposals might be coming forward. There's a tender. I think when we had the last environment committee, the relevant officers could offer to give people access to some of the tender documents. So I think it's probably best to look at the detail in that.
Thank you, councillor Saunders. And your second question, councillor Whiting, please.
Don't like Councillor Whiting.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks again, Chairman. This question again here. The council recently adopted an electric vehicle charging strategy that says the provision of charging for residents who do not have off-street parking homes is a short-term aim of his administration. Can the chairman of the Environment Committee give my residents in Tenement Linstead his time frame for providing them with local charging points? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question, Councillor Whiting. The strategy is clear that Swale Borough Council is only part of the solution to achieving the charging network suitable for all. The best solution for all, where residents have the ability, is for residential charging. However, in the strategy, we acknowledge that not all residential areas are feasible for this. In it, we recognise that KCC, as the Highways Authority, will be the key driver in developing on-street parking. But in the meantime, Swale will continue with its policy of installing EV charging units in its public car parks, with a focus on sites within close walking distance of areas with a high proportion of homes without off-street parking. We already have charging units at Central Car Park Faversham, Swallows Car Park, and the multi-storey car park in Sittingbourne, and Rose Street in Sheerness. The Environment Committee agreed the next wave of installations back in June, part funded by Swale Borough Council with funding support from government. These installations should be starting this side of Christmas at Queen's Hall Car Park, Faversham, Albany Road Car Park, Sittingbourne, and further units at Rose Street, Sheerness. Officers are now working on further bids for funding to continue this progress. Unfortunately, with Tenement and Linstead, in Tenement and Linstead, Swale does not own the public car parks nor suitable land. We understand that sites in the area are owned by the parish council and would therefore recommend that they look at the funding grants available. We would be happy to provide advice from officers on where to start. Finally, on a wider basis, we are continuously monitoring the demand for EV charging across the borough. Locations for electric vehicle charge points can be suggested on our website as we collect data on this issue to support future funding bids and continue conversations with KCC to encourage the adoption of new EV charging solutions and submissions to the upcoming local electric vehicle infrastructure fund.
Councillor Saunders. Councillor Whiting, do you have to supplement?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And I do. I'm grateful again for the response. Probably longer than it needed to be. The substantive point being that there are no plans at the moment in the short term to allow the tenant and limited residents that I represent be able to plug in their EV cars. This was a point I made very quickly. The appointment was made at the Recent Licensing Committee. We had to taxis, and we've extended the time we're allowing taxis to convert to electric because we realised the licensing committee accepted there was no way of those drivers charging their cars in places like Tenable Limited. So can I just ask my supplementary then is perhaps just to confirm, if the chairman would confirm, that he is discussing with KCC a relaxation of their rules about allowing cables to cross the pavement so that people can charge their cars, and if he is having those conversations, and what responses he's had to date. Thank you.
Well, I think the first thing I could emphasise is I'm chair of the committee, I'm not cabinet member. The officers are having discussions with the KCC about trying to improve the situation and allowing us to move forward with residential initiatives. But to go back to your previous point, the whole strategy is built around trying to put things where we can and to focus on those areas where it's the most needed. So, you know, as the strategy develops, working with charities and others, I'm sure we will get to obviously 10. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. I now call on Councillor Horton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question is to the Chair of Policy and Resources. And I will truncate the question and hopefully we'll get a truncated answer as well. The Chair of a parish council has recently sought clarification about an assertion made to parish councillors at a recent LCLF meeting that a 6-week consultation period on the forthcoming Regulation 19 consultation has been agreed. He has been informed that it was agreed at the PNR meeting on the 13th of July, which you chaired. I believe that assertion is unfounded. I recall that an indicative timetable was recommended and agreed. I do not recall a recommendation regarding the length of consultation or a clear statement of a 6-week consultation within the report. Given that confusion, would the Chair highlight where in the meeting the members of PNR specifically approved a 6-week consultation period for the revised Regulation 19?
Councillor Balder.
I'd like to thank Councillor Horton for this question, and indeed the other variations upon it that he submitted at various points. I had some suspicions it wasn't even his question originally. Initially, your first question alleged that a chair of the parish council, unspecified, asked myself at a date and place, unspecified, about an assertion I had allegedly made, with no evidence to specify where this alleged assertion was made, about an agreement at a meeting where you don't recall such an agreement being made. You then asked me to highlight where in that meeting the agreement that you don't recall being made was in fact made. At some point, your question was changed. And then after that, on the third go, your question changed to the chair of the parish council and sought clarification on the assertion. No wonder you find it confusing. The simple answer is that there was no such agreement and none had been sought. There was a recommendation at PNR where the LDS was discussed and approved, and which identified the Reg 19 consultation period would run through October, November and December. This included the time needed to take documents and reports to the Planning and Transport Policy Working Group, to Policy and Resources, and then to full council. Officers indicated that a 6-week consultation was the norm in such circumstances. Beyond that, I'm afraid I cannot recall there being anything specific regarding the set period of time, because at that point, there had not been any specific time agreed, and a number of options were being considered, including a full 12-week period that would run over the Yuletide break, an option which I personally favoured. Of course, these matters will hopefully soon be somewhat academic. It is always interesting to note how some members of the Conservative opposition seek to engage with issues that have little current relevance. The reason this is now hopefully academic is that the Planning and Transport Policy Working Group are recommending that PNR delay submission of the Reg 19 until this government decides what it is up to next. Bit missed at Councillor Truelove, as you'll see in my next sentence. It's ironic in some ways that Conservatives frequently warn about coalitions of chaos. Yes, that was nicked earlier. It is ironic in some ways that Conservatives frequently warn about coalitions of chaos when they manage more chaos within one governing party than any coalition I'm aware of created. 3 housing ministers in a single year. Yeah, said that well. 3 housing ministers in a single year, statements about protecting greenfields 1 minute, slashing planning regulations the next, levelling up here, there but nowhere, withdrawal of a 300,000 per year pledge from one speaker refuted by another, U-turns that aren't U-turns, but which everyone knows are U-turns every other day, development zones 1 week, protecting our countryside the next. What a shambles. It would be madness, utter madness, to spend more money chasing the flittering mildewed flakes proposed policy from this government.
So, Councillor Baldock, what does this actually have to do with Councillor Horton's
paper becomes law, and we have something that may be relied upon for long enough to actually carry through the local plan process. So no, there is no 6-week consultation, or indeed any other length of consultation on future housing in this borough likely to be forthcoming until this government gets its own house in some sort of order.
Well done, very clear.
Councillor Horton, do you have a supplementary question?
Is that a no?
Is that your question?
Yeah, that was my question. Thank you for the response. A simple no would have done. You do raise an interesting question though, and I have got a question. Are we moving to a point where we find it acceptable that when somebody changes a motion or a question, we ridicule them over the fact that they worked to get it accurate? Lots of motions get changed, and I don't think that's somewhere we want to go. Does the leader agree?
Thank you for your supplementary. When a question is submitted, it requires an answer and work on that answer is started. I have given 3 different versions of your question. One of them, after I'd written the response and by the deadline. I think we do need to ensure that when people are asking questions, we know what is they're asking so that the answer is actually specific to the question that was asked. Yes.
Oh, we're all clear on that one. Right, so we move on now to agenda item number 12. The next item is on the agenda is the miscellaneous constitution updates. I invite Councillor Baldock to introduce the report and propose the recommendation.
Preamble, moment about the government, economic. No, I think this is fairly straightforward. It's been through the Constitution Working Group, and I hope we can agree these the latest constitutional changes without too much debate. So I'll have to move the recommendation.
Councillor Baldock, is it a point of order, Councillor Henderson, or
No.
to speak on the? Yeah, thank you. I call on Councillor Horton to respond. Do you wish to speak now? Or?
I'll speak now. I didn't think there was any point in reserving my right. Please take a lead from the fact that the leader has proposed this. and the leader of the opposition is seconding it. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Horton. I'll now open up the debate to the floor, and I'll get councillor Henderson.
Only to say, Mr Mayor, what councillor Horton has just said, plus the fact they are minor changes, they are very clear. I do not believe they are contentious, and I move the vote be taken.
I do just have to ask, does anyone else wish to speak before I take the vote? Okay then, all those in favour, please show. That is carried unanimously. Thank you, members. Right, we'll move on now to agenda item 13, community governance review, second stage consultation recommendations. The next item on the agenda is, as previously said, I invite councillor Baldock to introduce the report and propose the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Chair. You asked to note the results of the second stage consultation for the community governance review conducted at Lucas Close, Sheerness Town Council area. I think it's worth noting that in the first set of consultations, 4 out of 5 people said they didn't want the changes, but now that we've gone out and asked them again, they're all in favour of it. So hopefully we can all support this very sensible change. I will have to move the recommendation.
Thank you, councillor Baldock. I'd now like to invite councillor Horton to second and ask whether he wishes to speak or reserve his right.
Speak now, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, councillor Horton.
Safe to say thank you to Keith Alabaster for the hard work he's done. This is a no-brainer.
Thank you. Councillor Baird.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. A success for common sense. I also would like to thank Keith and the team for going through this. It's a shame that something so easy takes so long. It is such a long process to get this through. And we've still got to go to the Electoral Commission to ask them to change the ward boundary, because it's only in our power to change the parish boundary. So actually, although these residents are now being welcomed into Queenborough, if it comes, unless the Electoral Commission actually agree to change it at their end, they're still going to be voting for Sheerness councillors at the next election. Absolutely farming.
Thank you, councillor Baird. Any further comments, questions? No, councillor Baldock, do you wish to sum up?
Thank you. Well, you're going to start asking me to send another letters to people then, but let's just move this to vote.
Thank you. Members, all those in favour? Thank you, members. That is unanimously carried. We move on now. The next agenda item 14. The next item on the agenda is the Seymour Town Centre supplementary planning document. Councillor Baldock, you're up again.
I think this is a really, really good piece of work. I think that the lead officer, Alison Peters, has done some exemplary work on this. I think it outlines a future vision for our town centre in Sittingbourne and gives a guideline as to how we get there. I think the sooner we can start delivering on this, the better. So hopefully we'll get your support tonight.
Thank you, councillor Baldock. I'm going to invite councillor Bonney to second and ask whether she wishes to speak now or reserve her right. Thank you. Open up the debate to the floor then. Councillor Dendorf.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Simply to thank the team I remember in our last meeting, we did ask that the Network Rail footbridge be shown, goes across from north to south, and here it is on the map. So thank you very much.
Thank you, councillor Dendall. Any further? Members, no? Councillor Bonny?
I'd just like to pass on my thanks to Flo Churchill, but in particular Alison Peters, who put her heart and soul into this document. And I think it's testament to her work. What we have before us is a comprehensive piece of work that will put us on the right trajectory for our principal town in our borough. It's something that has been somewhat lacking in the past and is vision that is needed. I think what has come out of it has been some really interesting discussions along the way through the consultation process, not least with Network Rail, and the previous speaker alluded to that, is there is a recognition now on the part of Network Rail that not only do they have the key infrastructure of the train station and the lines, but also they are a major part of the constraint of the town around the bridges. And they recognise in the piece of work they're currently undertaking, and they have gone through the process of looking at the bridge that links the way through from Eurolinks from Square Paths, and recognising the constraint on traffic. I led that discussion with the officers, and I'm really pleased they took it on board, took it away, and put some thought into it. Doesn't mean it's going to be solved overnight, but putting it and embedding it in a policy document like this means we have something to work to for the future. It means that if there is an opportunity to bid for funding, that we can do that. It's not a cheap thing to do. However, I think we all recognise trying to get in an experience around the town centre with those type rail bridges is a real problem for our residents and our businesses. But on a wider scale, this is a really fundamental document. It complements our existing local plan. It's not set in stone. It will be something that in the future will need to be revised and looked at. But I really appreciate all the hard work that has been done, and I hope you will all.
Thank you, councillor Bonny. Councillor Baldwin, which should sum up.
Now, just point out with a slight typo, recommendation 2 is recommended for adoption by full council. So I hope that we do that. Thank you.
Right, so I now take this to the vote by show of hands. All those in favour, please show. Any against? Any abstentions? Okay, so the motion is carried. Recommendations, I should say, are carried. Right, I now move on to agenda item 15. The agenda item for the Audit Committee's annual report, one which I would normally have given, having stood down to be your mayor this year. I now invite the Vice Chairman, Councillor Henderson, to give the Audit Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to introduce this report. If there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer them, but can't promise. I really, in the absence of the chair, I really can't do better than quote from his introduction to the report. where he says, I'm writing here, I can do no better than to quote from the chairman. Firstly, the committee has discharged its responsibility to provide independent and accurate information. Two, has provided robust scrutiny of the financial performance of the council. And thirdly, he is pleased to note, an unqualified accounts approach and also an approval on providing value for money. So those are the key points. For me, the position is really quite simply that the audit committee has discharged its duty during and discharged that duty successfully during what was undoubtedly a very difficult year in terms of finances and of course in terms of change of staff. And I would personally like to thank, not here, I assume he's not here, Phil Wilson, with whom I certainly worked for many years. He was always impeccably precise and complete in the work and the advice that he gave the committees. I think it's also worth thanking all the members of the audit committee for running, and we do only meet 4 times a year, but for doing all of its work in an objective way. And I can scarcely ever recall party political issues being brought to the fore there. And that's the right way to do it, because we're looking at objective numbers and happenings and actions during the year, and we should deal with them that way. And can I end just with a warning? I think it went well this year, but my warning certainly would be the next year is going to be significantly more difficult. We have a difficult budget to prepare, and I have no doubt that we will have an extremely difficult budget to fulfill once we have prepared it. So if everybody can expect some quite heavy demands on them, that would be sensible. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. I'd now like to invite Councillor Angela Harrison to second and ask whether she wishes to speak or reserve her right.
Mr Mayor, very briefly, as a new member of the committee, back on it after a few years, I've read the report, obviously. What I would like to say is, although I haven't been on audit for the last 3 years, I have kept in touch with Rich Clark, who has now left us for one of the London boroughs, which one. And he was excellent, and the work that he did and the way that he brought that audit committee up to, up, was tremendous. And I think, the fact that he's not here, like at the end of the year, I think it needs to be mentioned. He did a damn good job, and I hope that the person that's taken over does as well for us as he did. I think it's worth mentioning that.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. I can completely concur with those sentiments. I'll now open up the agenda item to debate. Are there any members who wish to speak to the audit committee? Councillor Baird.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman. Mr Mayor, I attended every single meeting, and as much as I want to tell my group I never want to be on the audit committee, I just wanted to concur with some of the comments that have been made about officers and the time that have been put in. Certainly as well about Phil Wilson, having worked with Phil on the budget task force for years. I appreciate his work. Although this
actual item is in the name of the current chairman, it is of course about last year's meeting. And so I just wanted to mention you, Mr. Chairman, and just say that you chaired all of the meetings effectively.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bear. I appreciate that sentiment. Any further comments, members? Right, so I'll move straight to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, members. I will just ask, because I was not quite sure, is there anyone against or any abstentions? That was carried unanimously then. Thank you, members. Right, so following on from that, the results, I now would like to close the meeting at 21:46. Thank you, members, for your attendance and your indulgence.